All right, guys. Thank you, everybody, for coming this morning. Thank you for the organizers of this event. And thank you for these young ladies to join us today from mainstream media to come up here in front of lots of Bitcoin maxis and laser eyes. Why don't we do a quick round the horn here? Let's see who's who, and introduce yourself and let the guys know what it is that you do.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I am Jemima Kelly. I am a salty AF no-coiner. I'm a columnist at the Financial Times who writes about Bitcoin, among many things.
I'm Izabella Kaminska, formerly of the Financial Times, where I was editor of FT Alphaville. Turned, as Pete nicely termed it, Doomcoiner. I turned Doomcoiner in March 2020, and then I left the FT.
Yes.
And now I'm also an entrepreneur because I started my own company.
Congratulations.
Pete Rizzo, editor at Bitcoin Magazine, also contributor to Forbes, probably best known in the space as being a journalist since 2013. I was the founding editor over at CoinDesk as well. So, yeah, excited to dig in. Combo.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Hall. I currently write and report for Cointelegraph, and I'm amazed, actually, sitting next to these panelists, how Bitcoin Magazine have put this panel together today. You know, people from the FT sat next to Bitcoin Magazine, sat next to Cointelegraph. So, yeah, very excited to take part. And, yeah, prior to Cointelegraph, I contributed to mainstream media publications, including Bloomberg and Reuters, before taking the proverbial orange pill.
So a fun question to start with. Hands up on the panel if you've ever written a FUD or hit piece article about Bitcoin.
What?
Oh.
Not me. Not me.
That was not scripted. That was not scripted. All right.
Admitting it is the first step. That's really
Sorry?
I said admitting it is the first step.
Yeah, no, not me.
Well, let's start with you two gentlemen. You have some. You need to repent your sins.
Maybe I'll start off. So early on in my career in Bitcoin, I came from a journalism background, and one of the things they teach you about in journalism school is this idea of objectivity. Right, that you're supposed to take a neutral position on actions and developments, within what you're covering. And so, as I came from being someone who was excited about Bitcoin as somebody who was doing journalism professionally, I took a serious look at that question, and I didn't participate in the Bitcoin economy early on, right? So I was a journalist writing about Bitcoin. Back then it was only Bitcoin. And I thought the choice to be objective required my non-participation in that system, right? So I took a very critical view of the things that were going on, right? And I was very influenced by other kind of mainstream media journalists because I was also trying to practice journalism, right? And kind of follow that, right? And I think early on, cryptocurrency journalism really wasn't seen as something that was worthy of doing, right? It was kind of seen within the mainstream media as something that was, we were lesser than the other things that were going on, right? And I certainly didn't feel that way. I thought Bitcoin was something that was worthy of my time to intellectually explore, but I wanted to be objective, right? And I think because of that, I put some distance between myself and really understanding Bitcoin, and I think over time, I've done my best to, correct that. But early on, if you read some of my pieces, I mean, some people will remember me, as a bit of a fudster. I still get some comments, So I try to acknowledge that past and be honest about that journey.
Joseph, explain yourself.
I have sinned. I sort of first properly started reporting on Bitcoin in 2018, 2019, but it was under the purview of, fintech or, I was living in the Ivory Coast at the time, and there I realized that my driver that took us to the office every day, he was using Bitcoin to receive money from Paris, where his son lived and worked. And I was like, why are you doing that? This is a Ponzi scheme. You can't possibly be using Bitcoin for the thing that it purports to do. That's not the real truth, because the real truth is what we read in the Financial Times and the Guardian. Yeah, I've got my guns out. I'm ready for you guys. And so I spoke to him more about it, and I then investigated what the remittance was like into sub-Saharan Africa using Bitcoin, and then relayed this information to my editor at the time. part of the group called Oxford Business Group, who then sold their research to Bloomberg. And through that, I started to report about, remittance into sub-Saharan Africa. And the way in which you'd write the article was, Bitcoin remittance has gone up by, 30% year on year, something like that. However, Bitcoin is a very volatile, unstable currency.
Going to zero.
It's going to zero, yeah. And on top of that, it's melting the ice caps. And have you heard of Chia coin, which is one of the greener cryptocurrencies? Maybe you should consider this and look at what a good journalist I am, because I'm giving you, an objective view of the space. And then also report about how Chia is perhaps dodgy for whatever reason. I don't know if this coin still exists, by the way. And then, resort with the final conclusion, which is, yes, whilst remittance has increased, Bitcoin remains this unstable, currency that people can manipulate or whatever it may be. I followed that for maybe a year before realizing that maybe I've got it wrong and there might be more to this coin than we're expected to sort of surface level understand. And that's when I did my own research and tried to write for mainstream media articles about the, not necessarily singing Bitcoin's praises, but definitely trying to portray things perhaps a bit more accurately. And that led to me, leaving mainstream media and now reporting full-time for a crypto media publication in which I write almost 99% of the time about Bitcoin.
Ladies, you kept your hands down.
Well, I haven't written any FUD.
I don't feel like I've written any FUD myself. I mean, first time I came across Bitcoin must have been about 2011, and it was actually through Tracy Alloway, who's now at Bloomberg. She was the first one to pick up on it. And I was immediately intrigued, and I knew this was going to be a big thing. But, as a journalist, and having been schooled as, from the objective art, I also felt that this is so out there, it deserves a lot of scrutiny. So my entire kind of thought process was, this deserves a lot of scrutiny. And I think that was the take we had on Alphaville was, if this is what it claims to be, it'll defy scrutiny. And so for, however many years, we tried to, I think our critiques were actually very valid. I wouldn't call it FUD. I think we were ahead of the curve on a lot of the stuff that later became understood in the industry, everything from the scaling challenges, to the environmental footprint. I think we were just like I remember writing loads of pieces about how it's not going to be a cheap payment system. I think all of that was not FUD. I think it was educated criticism and hopefully helped the system get better. But like a managing consulting firm, we were there trying to address the issues. Because managing consulting firms don't do that anymore. They're just absorbed by the system. But anyway, that's a different story. And so I think that was our approach, and I think that was fair. It wasn't FUD or biased. It was simply scrutiny, because something like this deserves scrutiny. That's how I would see it.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to build on that, Jemima?
I mean, everything deserves scrutiny, I think. So, I think the FT has a really good way of, in fact, when I joined the FT, that was one of the things that was really drilled into me was be skeptical about everything that you're told. But I also have had a bit of a journey, I guess. My journey has been, the first time I heard about Bitcoin was on a date about a really long time ago. I don't know when it was, but I think it was probably 2012, and I think I had heard of it. But I was on a date with an early Bitcoin bro, which was quite. Suffice to say, it did not go anywhere.
Is he here today?
He might be. I don't know.
Raise your hand.
I can't even remember his name. Anyway, I would love to see a recording of that, because he was schooling me on it, and I would love to see what he was actually saying. Anyway, then when I started working at Reuters, and I was on the FX team, so covering currencies, and I was like, should we cover Bitcoin? Because that's kind of maybe a currency, is it? No. Spoiler, it's not.
But certainly seems very functional in practice. So. Sorry? It certainly seems very functional in practice for
Bitcoin.
That purpose. Yeah.
Okay. So I actually started writing about Bitcoin when I was at Reuters. And it was like a choice. I was I pioneered some of the kind of coverage that we did because, no one else was really looking at it
that was the same
at
at the
Reuters.
FT. Just
Yeah, I'm
not
sure.
To butt in, but nobody knew who to, the tech team thought it was a finance story. The finance
exactly.
team
It kind
thought
of
it
felt,
was
it
a tech story, so no one was covering it.
It always used to fall between the cracks, and now you have dedicated crypto teams at places like the FT and Bloomberg and elsewhere. And so I started writing about it, and then everyone was like, oh, I started writing about blockchain, I started writing about different cryptocurrencies that shan't be named. And the more I kind of, I started with a very open mind, and I thought it was fun, and it was much more fun going to meetings in coffee shops in Shoreditch that have Bitcoin ATMs. That was way more fun than going to a bank and talking to them about the pound, whatever, which is what I had been doing.
Stand with GBP, that's what I'm saying. GBP is the new Bitcoin.
The original shit.
When moon. Buy the dip. Buy the dip right now. So, and then I had a very open mind. I still actually, funnily enough, I do actually have an open mind. Even though, you can have an open mind and still have a strong opinion about something. And the more I kind of spoke to people, the more I kind of thought about it and started speaking to some people who were critical of Bitcoin, the more I kind of started to feel a little bit disillusioned. One of my biggest influences was Izzy, because I was reading Alphaville, and Alphaville would do, and I was a reporter at Reuters, which is completely you shouldn't have an opinion, although obviously opinions always seep into everything. And I was reading Alphaville, and I was like, this is really compelling. There are arguments against Bitcoin. And then I joined Alphaville, and then
the indoctrination was complete. Yeah.
And nowadays, she is even though she was the one who inspired, even though Izzy is the one who kind of inspired my initial skepticism, I would say that I am more skeptical now than you are.
I think so.
So there you go.
From a dumb question from a guy that's not inside the walls of an institution of the nature of the FT or a magazine or something like this. What I want to know is, are you given a remit? Go write a negative article about Bitcoin?
No, it always makes me laugh that people think that it could possibly work like that. I think journalists...
That assumes that the journalism organizations are organized enough to have that sort of top-down...
I mean, they're organized, but there's just no way. I wouldn't be a journalist if I was told. If you were told, I think most of us go into journalism because we're kind of passionate about it, and if you were being told what you had to say, that is the opposite of what being a journalist is about. So the idea that you're encouraged to for the clicks or something, write kind of anti-Bitcoin articles is truly, honestly, I mean, you'll back that up, right?
The
that's
problem
not correct.
I think the problem is not at the individual level with individual journalists making choices. There's this thing in media we call the media framing, right? And I think what we're really the people who are in the industry kind of doing the journalism, the frustration is that the frame hasn't changed, right? The frame has to match reality in some way, right? And I think the current media frame is that sort of all cryptocurrencies are equal. They're all sort of doing this largely irrelevant thing, and they're a net negative for society. And so it's as an individual, as a journalist, you either contribute to that frame or you are against the frame. And I think for me, it was never the struggle with individuals practicing, right? I think Izabella is somebody I looked up to as well. You mentioned your criticism, I think, was valuable for the space, and criticism can serve that function. But yeah, I think it's about that framework, right? We all contribute to this framework in some way.
I think unless you kind of come against the frame, really in a very kind of system-shocking way, you don't necessarily even understand the frame. I reject the frame.
I don't think cryptocurrencies are evil. I don't think that they're irrelevant. Otherwise, what would I be why am I here? Mm-hmm. I do think they're a net negative, and right. But I don't really know why we're talking about a frame. I mean, I just don't think it's like that. I think we're even at the FT, there's a huge variety of opinion, right? there are some people, we have people who are doing the reporting and who are trying to stay reasonably neutral. But also the other thing that people don't get is that like, it's like journalists are meant to be objective. I mean, for a start, that depends what kind of journalist you are. That's not necessarily the case. And also being like completely objective is quite difficult. You can be fair. You are meant to be fair, right? But you can be fair and still really be against something, right? So let's say you were writing about World War II or whatever, like, or what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, although we won't like get into that, but like you can be fair and still take a line, especially if you're a columnist. That's literally what you're paid to do, is to write opinions. But until now, like, I mean, and Alphaville's the same, like it's kind of like an opinion-y based thing. But the idea that you have to like, that balance means, and that fairness means taking something seriously that you don't think has earned that kind of respect. That just, I don't believe that's the case.
I would say on Alphaville, we are an opinion, we were, and I'm not there anymore, we were an opinion-based, commentary service. And I think when we first came on the scene, it was very confusing to a lot of PRs, because Alphaville sort of sat between news and comment, which is very illegal in the traditional concept of journalism. There has to be a fine distinction between news and comment. But we were in the kind of early days of the blogosphere, and all the rules were being broken, and we were like stealing images from like anywhere, and it was chaos. And no one at the FT really noticed us, because we were just like the people who do online stuff, like online, it's what goes in the paper that matters. So back in the really early days of Alphaville, we were like an autonomous republic within the FT, and we were just like the FT hedge on everything. So if the FT was saying this, we were like, but what about this, And I think over time, as online became more influential, these like nerds who sat in the corner of the FT, didn't talk to anyone and were weird, we started to clash with the more conventional reporters. So we had to evolve, and we started going into more things like that cross different jurisdictions in terms of beat reporting, and that's how we ended up doing crypto. But we were increasingly influential, and I don't think internally we didn't have the kudos that we had externally. So Alphaville was like this weird entity within the like a subversive little unit. I'm trying to think of a good metaphor, but someone's not coming to my mind.
I think autonomous state is good.
Yeah, an autonomous state within the FT. But then, as online became more prominent, I think we lost a lot of that autonomy, and it became a bit more top-down directed. And so by that point, I was like, I'm out of here, because I want to be an autonomous agent. So that's why I left. But
you wanted some self-sovereignty, perhaps?
I wanted self-sovereignty, yes. I Brexited the FT.
Has the FT or Alphaville ever written a positive article about Bitcoin?
Of course.
Oh.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah,
I would argue that I would argue that the effects of some of the articles were positive, right? So this is, again, there's this myth that that you can't have criticism within the Bitcoin community or in the cryptocurrency space, or that criticism is not allowed, and I think it's just completely false, right?
Well, it's not good. Like, if you're trying to be scientific, you've got to be pro-criticism. I mean, criticism makes you better. It makes you stronger.
But I think one of the challenges, the necessary background for you to have relevant criticism for this space is so incredibly high. So I dealt with even learning this myself and training other journalists. You have to understand software ethics, monetary ethics, the history of economics, the history of software, and these are things that take time. And a lot of the people who are being put on these jobs and these roles, like, this is their first job out of school. You're taking somebody at Bloomberg, they're 25 years old, and all of a sudden they're thrust into a market that is
describing me.
They're thrust into a market where people are making billions of dollars, slinging all sorts of crazy things, right? So, I just think that criticism requires that you're coming from a place of knowledge and understanding, and I think one of the places that journalism has really failed is the media outlets no longer support that, and specifically with cryptocurrency, they don't support that. And the end result is, I think, just a lot of consumer harm, right? And I think ultimately...
I would make the same argument about Bitcoiners, right? There's a lot of consumer harm from the massive lack of understanding, excuse me, and kind of utopian vision of what Bitcoin can do. And that is we have to counter that because I believe that's really harmful. And so, like,
why do you need to counter that?
Who are all these why should like the Bitcoiners, like, why are they the experts in like monetary theory and like how to do like better politics and how to solve like our like failing democracy? Like, why? So you're saying that journalists aren't well trained enough? Well, so a Bitcoiner, that they the people that we should? I don't get that. Like, I hear what you're saying. Like, if you want to make criticism, you need to be
informed.
Well informed, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
I believe I am. I've been writing about Bitcoin for probably like a lot longer than like a lot of people here have been like into Bitcoin, right? I've been writing about it since 2015. A lot of people, like, you probably got into it later than that, right?
Much later.
Yeah, there you go. So like, it's not that I don't understand it. It's just that
better than you do, though.
I
do.
Okay.
He does.
Okay. but like, but
how long is it going to take?
What I'm saying.
I just intervene. Like, what does that mean? What does knowing Bitcoin
exactly.
better? Like, that is because I try to be a
knowing
realist.
That it's scarce. I mean, your recent hit piece against Bitcoin was saying how Bitcoin can be copied. Like, there's been, I mean, several people probably in this audience today read this article and actually wanted to ask you about this separately, but maybe we'll come to it later. And, you know, one of the points you make is that Bitcoin isn't scarce because you can copy it and make a BSV or Bcash or whatever else, you know, fork it. And that's just like a fundamental misunderstanding of what Bitcoin is.
I don't agree. I don't think I said that. Yeah, I mean, I'm at a Bitcoin conference. Obviously, I'm not going to. I'm surprised I haven't been booed yet, so thanks for that. Feel free. But like,
Jemima. Sorry, I'm just.
But like, learn to code, yeah.
I tried. It wasn't very good.
But the idea is just on that, right? Like, you can't solve like inequality and all the things that Bitcoiners pretend that they really want to solve, right? You can't solve like failing democracies with code. That's about like code. It's the technology. You can't solve extremely complex problems with a bit of code. Anyway, but I didn't say that Bitcoin isn't scarce. Obviously, given that I've been writing about it for a long time, I understand how many Bitcoins there are and how many there will be when they're all mined. I understand that, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. I don't think I used the phrase Bitcoin. I said Bitcoin has a scarcity problem. Well, it does, because the idea, so like the whole like premise of Bitcoin being like the only, of Bitcoin maximalism is that like Bitcoin is the only one. And that's why Bitcoin maximalism has happened, right? Like you wouldn't have to call it maximalism if there wasn't this dire need to try and separate yourself from the rest of the land of crypto.
But I think the counter
Because otherwise, because there's no scarcity in the land of crypto. There are 21,000 and counting cryptocurrencies.
But what you're saying then is that in the entire field of computer science, of people trying to build cryptocurrencies, you would acknowledge that there's thousands of these. What you're saying then is that there's no difference between these things, and that they're not. It's not worthy of the intellectual exploration to classify these things.
Well,
and ultimately, if we're not interested in that, if journalists are not intellectually interested in that,
I'm really interested in that. But
Okay.
I've still come to like. So I'm not saying that Bitcoin is exactly the same as like any so-called shitcoin, right? But I'm just saying that it's not fundamentally uncopyable. For example, like a lot of people who are into Bitcoin are quite into like into privacy. Well, Bitcoin isn't the best for that. Like you've got things like Monero. You can make 1,000 Moneros. Like there's no there's like a lot of. So I'm not saying that every cryptocurrency is equal, right? But there are some that could be better, and you can't stop that from happening. You can't just like create this maximalism religion and be like, because it's the first.
But that's not how it functions. Like the reason that we have Bitcoin maximalism is this is based on our understanding of Bitcoin as a computer science system and observing it over time.
Do you have a computer science background? I thought you had a journalism background. Yeah.
I do have a journalism background, but I also have the humility to say that I did this job every day for 6 or 7 years, and that I maybe wasn't as good as it as I should have been. And that my personal actions were always striving to be better within that system.
Me too. Like I recently wrote an article about intellectual humility. I'm constantly trying to be better.
But I'm just saying, like, I think journalists should come to the subject matter with that perspective.
I do.
Isabella, I can see
do.
you're trying to.
No, I try to be a realist, and I'm trying, as always, to be like somewhere. I hate polarization. I like to bring. I'm kind of like.
You're a unifier.
I'm fundamentally a hippie. I want to bring people together and for it to be calm.
Bitcoin's for everyone, yeah.
But what I think is missing, like if I identify it as anything in the crypto space, it is as a maxi. I get that, because that was where I was failing to understand the scarcity issue before, I think. And I was trying to explain this to Jemima yesterday, is that because it was number one, because it was first, you can't rewind history. It can never...
I agree with that.
You can't...
Yeah.
There's a fundamental endowment in the energy and the tech that has gone into the original coin.
You can only solve the double spend problem once.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think that makes a brilliant invention.
That makes it different to all the other coins.
Anytime.
That's why, for me, if I have to pick my flavor of coin, it is going to be Bitcoin. And
Are you stacking sats? Is that what you're saying?
Sorry?
Did you just say you're stacking sats?
No, what does that mean?
Yes, you know what that means.
Love it.
She is. Very good cover, very good optic.
No, but look, the reason my critique of Bitcoin was more focused on the fact that I thought the system, the core system, I was never a fan of the core system. I was just critical about banks, and we covered 2008. Tracy Alloway and I were like, seen as horrific sort of bête noirs of the conventional financial space as much as anything, but I still believed in. I believed in the system. I thought the system wasn't broken. What made me totally revise my view wasn't so much my understanding of Bitcoin, it was my understanding of the system. Like in 2020, I saw how quickly it can descend into total kind of control, over-control and dictatorial. I mean, whether you agree with COVID regulations or not, that's irrelevant to my argument. My argument is that I saw how quickly you can descend from a relatively free system into a totally draconian authoritarian system based on potentially, I'm not saying it was, but potentially if it was, propaganda. And that to me was very scary, because the one thing that I had, these days there's loads of disinfo experts out there and people who call themselves disinfo experts. But I literally have been studying propaganda since I was, at college. That was the one thing that I've always been passionate about, is focusing on like how propaganda works. I studied ancient history. I studied like the propaganda systems of Augustus, and then when I was at journalism college, I studied war propaganda, and so I was always very conscious of that. And that's because my parents are Polish, and my mother, was very. They weren't dissidents, but they were very critical of communism. And my mother used to always say, at least in Poland, we knew we were being, brainwashed, but here in the West, people don't even know it. So that was like the mantra I was brought up under. And I think that is what changed in 2020, is that I fundamentally changed my understanding of my perspective of the system. And I realized that Bitcoin was a useful thing to have around as a contingency, and that is why I'm a doom coiner.
Doom coiner.
But I'm still a realist. I still side with Jemima, because I still think on a day-to-day basis, I think it's kind of useless. But in terms of
wait until you can go out and buy your lunch outside with Bitcoin today. I'm sure anybody here will gladly buy you lunch and drinks.
Can I do it on Twitter actually?
What, buy me lunch?
I'll tweet it out, and hopefully some random pleb around the world might buy your lunch.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah? We can do that.
But there is no free lunch.
There isn't Bitcoin.
No, because they've worked for that Bitcoin to buy you the lunch. But I want to come back to consumer harm, because we talked about that, and we kind of skipped over it very quickly. Joe, I think I'll go to you on this, because your story earlier about when you're in Africa, I think you said. Mm-hmm. The consumer harm, when people do read negative articles about Bitcoin and then do not invest in it and do not research it, that is definitely something that needs addressing, because people can literally save themselves and their families from this technology.
Oh my God, okay.
Okay, they've not done that? So, okay.
Most retail investors got in 21.
We're not talking about retail. We're not talking about retail. We're talking about families.
Developing countries. Do you know how many people? It's really not. It's like.
Have you seen the latest inflation print?
Have you seen the latest Bitcoin price?
You can buy a fraction of Bitcoin. We do know that.
It's not about if you can buy a fraction of Bitcoin. It's about if you invested a year ago, you would have lost 2/3 of your money. And that's not funny when you don't have any money. So if you're talking about consumer harms, if you've sold out. Yes, but some people actually need enough money to pay for their mortgage. Like, some people aren't Bitcoin whales. Some people don't have money. Some people in Ivory Coast don't have enough money to sit on their sats for like years on end. If you tell them to buy Bitcoin and it plunges by 2/3, you don't think that's consumer harm. You think it's like, oh, just hodl. Like, people can't afford hodl.
Can I rebut, if possible?
Yes, please.
Sorry, my example of Guillaume in the Ivory Coast, what was really interesting for me and what really twigged was the fact that he said the reason why he was saving in Bitcoin rather than saving in the CFA, like a horrible hangover of French colonialism, was because no one could steal it from him. And that was when I was like, wow, okay, this...
Apart from like, okay.
Yeah. So yes, it's volatile. Yes, it goes down. Yes, I am so much poorer today than this time last year. But guess what a government can't do? They can't take... Oh, actually, now I'm admitting I have Bitcoin. Sorry, the Bitcoin that I had yesterday, which I don't have today, they couldn't have taken that Bitcoin from me because it can't be debased. It can't be stolen from you. And the CFA was chopped in half, the value was, in early 1990, I'm not actually sure of the date, purely because the French decided to chop the peg in half. And, you know, these are the realities of billions of people around the world living in the global south. We are in an incredibly privileged position to talk about 100%. Money in the way that we do on stage.
I think that is
Bitcoin is a
case. Like, for me, this is exactly what where I've turned my perspective, because look at what's happening with the dollar. Like, the dollar used to be a neutral currency. Money is supposed to be neutral. That is how the price signal kind of manifests, because money is neutral. But the dollar is not neutral anymore. It is because of, KYC, AML, FATF, it's politicized. We've got sanctions. There is, whether rightly or wrongly, I'm not judging the politics of it, but I'm saying it's not a neutral currency anymore, which means from a price discovery perspective, it is it's like we're living in the world of capital controls. And so if you don't necessarily need Bitcoin for everything, but where you need Bitcoin is for trade between different systems that don't agree with each other. And in communism, I hate to keep bringing this up.
No, but it's a perfect example. Imagine if Bitcoin was around during communism.
Yeah, so in communism, people used the dollar because it was, the physical dollar was unconstrained. So, and the Americans didn't really, there were theoretically sanctions and we were like, Cold War. But in reality, it was seen as a good thing that the dollar was infiltrating the communist system because it was bringing free market mentality into a command economy. And we broke the communist system through the fact that in the end, the free market penetrates through into a command economy. And I grew up in that environment. My dad was actually doing remittances from Poland, from the UK to Poland, and so he was part of that whole system.
Bitcoin would have fixed that.
Well, at the time, you didn't need Bitcoin because we didn't have digital systems, right? So you just, at the time, the dollar was fine because the dollar was neutral. So the dollar fixed that.
But today we do, and we have families that are in the exact same situation that you were in 10, 15, 20 years ago.
The reason you need something like Bitcoin is because of the scaling situation. So you can't take down a command economy with paper currency if the command economy is on a CBDC with surveillance tech and digital speed. You need to have something that is equally digital because you're not going to be able to, just look at Ukraine, how are they funding themselves? They are adopters of crypto more than anybody else because you need to have the speed. So anyway, I'm going to stop now. But
can I just say,
yes.
Because I think again people don't, and it's funny that this column got called a hit piece by you, because I actually, I was trying to make the arguments for Bitcoin at the same time, and there are some. I do believe that there is some. I think it's an amazing invention. I have said that always. I've never not said that. That fixing the double spend problem or whatever. And I think there is value in there's value in teaching a whole generation of people about like how money works and how it doesn't, but also there's like value in having censorship resistant money. Like I do think it's nice to have that, right? But because there are so many cons, it's not worth the cons. So that's my view. So like it's not that, so I'm not, this is the thing I think it's like misunderstood because I do actually have a balanced view, but I still don't like it. I think the cons vastly outweigh the pros. But I can see the pros, and that's not always understood. So I just wanted to say, it's not that I can't see that. I can, and I still think it sucks.
You might never need it as well. Is that fair to say?
Me?
Yeah.
Need what?
Bitcoin.
Me personally?
Yeah.
I don't really get the question. I don't know.
The reason why you see so many cons is perhaps guided by the fact that you might never need Bitcoin. You know.
As in, like, she's in a secure life with no, like...
I mean, I don't accept the frame of that question,
like,
so I can't answer it.
Ethiopia, where the government is tearing... you're in a secure system.
I would much prefer the dollar if I was in a country where I was worried about... I mean, are you...
Not in Russia.
Has the dollar crashed two-thirds in the last year? Will the dollar ever crash?
But what if you're, like, a liberal Russian, right? And you don't agree with Putin, but you want to, like... push back against him. Access to dollars is going to be really hard for you nowadays.
So like there might be that's the thing. Again, I'm saying that there might be some like tiny, but if access to dollars is going to be hard, you think access to Bitcoin is going to be super easy? I mean, okay, anyway.
Yes,
but
easy.
Okay. But again,
access Bitcoin today.
Sorry?
But it's a terrible,
yes,
like,
anyone can
it's like,
access
it's
Bitcoin
a desperate last solution, right? Like, Jesus, if I have to get a currency that I don't know if it's going to, like, crash by, like, 2/3 in a year, like, that is desperate. Like, no, it is. It's seriously desperate. This is the thing. It's not even a joke. Like, and what makes me laugh as well is that, like,
just
Bitcoiners pretend to care so much. It was exactly the same as Mark Zuckerberg when he launched Libra. Suddenly, he was like, we want to launch this currency to help the developing world. And it's like, why have you suddenly grown this passion for the developing world? Okay, you are actually an exception because you've lived there. No, you are actually an exception.
Thanks.
But what pisses me off is this idea that oh, the reason is this like absolute, like it's so disingenuous. It's okay to say that you all want to get rich. It's okay to just admit that. Yeah. Like everyone wants to be, well, most people in the world want to be rich. Like just don't try and say this is about trying to help people in developing nations because that is really, I think that's really harmful because I think that's really harmful.
So far off.
Get off the stage.
That's the thing. Okay, yeah. A lot of people do come for number go up. Absolutely, 100%. I was one of those people. I used to work in foreign exchange markets. For 18 years, I sat at the absolute spigot of the freshly printed money. I was there, Mr. Cantillon effect himself, and I rent-seeked between UBS and HSBC and Goldman Sachs and whoever else. I brokered hundreds of billions of dollars for these banks.
But you're obviously not driven by money then?
Oh, I 100% was when I found Bitcoin.
Oh, you're not anymore? You've changed?
Nope.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I mean, I'm not driven by money. That's why I'm a journalist, right? Like, I've got lots of family members who work in, like, banking and stuff. I haven't pursued that because that's not what I'm driven by, right? Mm-hmm. So, like, but it's like, it makes me laugh at the idea that you should trust, like, Bitcoin people who like have a massive financial incentive, like the idea that
don't trust verify.
Everyone thinks that I'm salty because I didn't buy it in like 2015 when I started writing about it. It's like
you don't sound salty.
I introduced myself as a salty no-coiner, so
yeah.
I mean, I'm not salty. I feel like you guys must be quite salty. Have you seen the Bitcoin price?
But
Sorry.
The question is,
no, because we don't look at it.
Under 19 today.
We don't care. That's the point. We don't care. No, thank you. You're missing this point.
I believe you.
I'm going to back up Jemima on one point, which is that definitely on the number go up thing, because I have continuously been harassing, with this, like, oh, you've missed out on, like, you're an idiot because you didn't buy in. It's like, but really, I think, Pete, we were talking about this earlier, like, as a journalist, you're not motivated by making money. I mean, you are motivated by, your reputation is what you're putting on the line, right? You don't have to put, like, X amount of dollars into a position. And that's for the benefit of everybody. But, bias creeps into journalism in other ways anyway. So I think, and at some point you can't, journalists aren't Jedis. We're not priests. We eventually have to take a position somewhere.
Right, but we have to keep our eye on where the harm is in the system. So I asked about consumer harm. It involves all these things: people trapped in bad financial systems who don't have financial systems, and then you could contrast that with what is happening in Bitcoin.
What's happening in Bitcoin? Lovely thing.
Is that a system?
I mean, listen, but you can also hold. You can agree. I agree that the financial system is not there's loads of issues with it, right? That doesn't mean that Bitcoin is the answer. But
it's providing services that are not available in the rest of the financial system. That was the point of his statement.
Well, again, I can see that there are some things that it provides, but it's not worth it for all the negatives it provides. That's my argument. It's not that I can't see that there's anything that it can provide. There are some things.
And the negatives in your mind are just the price going down.
Well, the negatives are that it's a massive Ponzi scheme, in my opinion. A headless Ponzi scheme. Mainly. It's not about
how do you believe that both Bitcoin is an invention and that is a Ponzi scheme? How do you rationalize those two things?
Because I think that the actual invention itself, in terms of creating a peer-to-peer currency that doesn't require a third party to verify the transaction, I think that has value. I think that's an amazing invention. People tried to do it before.
But how can it be a Ponzi scheme if it is also an invention? An invention has to have invented something useful that did not exist before.
I don't really understand that question. Why would those two things be incompatible? You can invent a Ponzi scheme. I mean, it was invented.
But a Ponzi scheme is not.
Yeah,
exactly. By Mr. Ponzi.
What do you mean it can't be an invention and a Ponzi scheme?
It would cease to be a unique invention if it was something else.
It's what?
Intrinsic value, he's saying.
I don't know why he's shouting out intrinsic value. But I mean, it's a Ponzi scheme because it's a head. It's not. It doesn't have a centralized entity.
So Bitcoin invented a Ponzi scheme.
Let's hear the other side.
It's not a complete Ponzi scheme. It's very similar to it.
Joe, please.
Sorry.
Can you say what you need to say there?
I know we've done a lot on journalism, but
have we been extended our time?
I think we have.
Oh God.
They voted.
Okay, we're going to be in an endless loop.
It's also Bitcoin's media problem, right? And the idea is to talk about how Bitcoin's treated in the media. And so I collected a few headlines and a few sort of tidbits I found in mainstream media in the run-up to this panel. And there's a question for everyone, I guess, here today. It was in The Guardian, and it was a crossword. So 7 letters, and your clue is dodgy internet currency. So that was a couple of weeks ago.
Answer.
Bitcoin. Sorry. And then there was the Luna crash, which was covered by The Times in detail. And it was all about how Luna, this obvious Ponzi scheme, went up in flames. And what did they use as the headline photo? They used a picture of a gold coin. I brought one with me, one of these things.
Yeah.
Because Bitcoin is still depicted in the media as a bloody gold coin. What's all this about?
But this is
You've got coins on your socks, Joe.
This is the Cointelegraph logo.
Yeah, but they're coins. There's depicted as coins by
it's a
company you work for. Well, I'm just saying your own company does it. Sorry.
No,
yeah.
I think
well, I can call out the problem.
Sorry.
Just
pointing it out.
It transcends Bitcoin. I don't think it's about. I think there's just sloppy journalism at the moment, more broadly. I think it applies to crypto. I think it applies to coverage of Ukraine. I think it applies to everything. There's just sloppy journalism, and that's because, us dinosaurs from back in the day who got trained in the old way. I mean, even then, news was always partisan, but I think there was a base kind of, respect for objectivity. I was taught, it was really... I was taught in these core values, and I just don't think they're there anymore. And I want to change that, and that's why I've left the FT, because I think you're right. I think people are sloppy because of this echo chamber, because of the gaslighting manifests because journalists don't have time to do any research. So you just trust that X said something, and then you just repeat it, and then before you do it, people are just I do it. I try not to, but you can't help yourself. So you're
yeah. To do it, right?
And so before you know it, you're passing, it's like Chinese whispers, and the whole thing gets distorted, and we're living in a simulacrum of complete disreality as a result of it. I'm very worried about it. I think it's information pollution on another level. And I'm not talking about the conventional idea of fake news, that like everything that Trump says is fake news. I'm talking about more broadly. I think fake news is a problem across the board. It is like the modern day like collapse of Rome, but instead of military armies being like two sides, there's just loads of different factions, and it's corporate PRs who are using disinformation tactics. It's everybody. It's state actors, it's crypto people, it's Elon, it's everybody. Because you have to fight the disinfo with your own disinfo. So then it's just disinfo madness. So I want to change that. So that's why I'm going to try and create this journalistic network that I'm calling inscribers, but I can, if anyone's interested in giving me some Bitcoin for it, that would be cool. But anyway,
are you trying? You're trying to find the truth.
I'm trying to create a competitive. I want journalism to be truth oriented, but for people to understand that truth is not. It isn't actually intrinsic in journalism because everything is subjective. So you have competing values, and as long as people understand the value that a journalist is coming at something from, then it's okay. It's like risk disclosures on financial products. It's like, I'm a left-leaning journalist or I'm a right-leaning journalist. These are my biases, and this is how I write. That's okay as long as it's self-declared. But the problem is, it's not the overtly biased media that's even the problem. It's the media that's neutral, but is inadvertently biased, and they don't even know they're showing the bias. And that's because media is detached from its banners. So, the Telegraph will have, journalists who are not necessarily, representing the values of the Telegraph, and the Guardian will have maybe, everyone is not attached to the banner headlines anymore, values anymore. And I think that's the way to tackle this is to make everyone has to wear their values on their chest in the style of like a knight or something, and then you know what you're fighting for, kind of thing.
There's I agree with a lot of what Izzy says, but not to the same extent. And obviously I really believe in the FT, and I'm still at the FT, and I also really believe in having more truth in journalism. And I think we're the best English language paper that there is. But I've actually lost the train of my thought. What did you just say? I've forgotten. Move on. Sorry.
Okay, well, the FT, I incredibly value my time there. I think it was amazing. It's still one of the most amazing papers out there. But this is not unique to the FT. I think it's everybody. I think the mainstream press in general is in crisis. That's my view on it.
Yeah. I remember what I was going to say, sorry. A guy I know is an engineer, and when he did his exams, he had to it's hours long that you have to solve some building that, some weird building you have to, and before you you have to have a whole page of what your assumptions are. And I thought that was such a nice kind of in fact, I might even write a column about it, that journalists should and everyone really before you start doing something, you should be look, these are my assumptions. And then people know where you're kind of coming from. Because I think otherwise people, you do get misunderstood. And
Pete, I wonder if this happens to you, because for me, I've been thinking about this for a very long time, and I've narrowed down the problem to the process that journalists go through. So you have an idea for a story, you pitch it to the editor, and you say, I want to do this. I have a hunch that X, Y, Z, and they're like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good story. You'll then go off and you'll do your research, blah blah blah. But say you want to, it's a challenging story, which is accusatory of X or Y group. Chances are you're going to leave the right of reply until the very end, right? So by the time you've done the story, in your research, say your research doesn't match your hypothesis, you've invested 3-4 days worth of work, which in the current media model is
and the media business model cannot sustain
right.
that currently.
So then you can't go to the editor and go, oh shit, actually I was a bit wrong. What I thought was this, it's actually not this. And also when I actually talk to the other side, they really made a fair point. By that point they're like, but we've saved the space for the newspaper, and and let's see if we can just work the story around. Maybe instead of is, we could write could, and that's how it ends up.
Bitcoin could be a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, that's literally
rather than is.
So when you read the news, you have to always if I see coulds anywhere, I'm like, oh
By the way, that's not actually how the FT always works. And I actually,
always,
the way
I'm not
the
saying
way I
always,
pitch,
but like that's
the way I pitch my columns is that I give them a top. Normally, like 9 times out of 10, I give them a topic and I say, this week I wrote about procrastination, right? I said, I want to write about procrastination. I don't know what my argument is going to be because I haven't researched it enough yet. And that's what I normally do. I say, I want to write something about this situation. And they don't make me give me their argument.
Give me the slightly different. I'm talking about like when you know, and actually even in column land, if your hypothesis,
I would say especially I thought what you were saying makes more sense in column land. But anyway.
Yeah, but I think but you're under pressure by that point to commit to some sort of argument.
Yeah.
And when this goes to the editor, how much can it be tampered with? And then you've got who decides on the titles as well, because that might be completely contrary to what you were actually trying to write about.
Yeah, the title issue is really annoying.
Yeah, normally it's the sub. I mean, sometimes like today I wrote my own headline, like you know, and I wrote it and then they didn't edit it. Sometimes they'd edit it. I'm a bit touchy about like headlines because sometimes it isn't. So I normally like if they haven't run it by me, I normally like go into the system and I go and check it. And if I don't like it, I say to them, can we change that? And then they've never said, no, we can't. Like,
right.
And also, like, in terms of editing, you know, it's a two-way thing. It's not, you don't just feed something in and then they say, and then they edit it and you don't get to have a say back. They kind of send you their version. But in particular, when you're a columnist, they're not telling you what opinions to have. Obviously not. Like,
unless you're, what's his face? Peter McCormack.
Oh, yeah. Is Peter McCormack here? Because he apparently got offered a column by the FT, but he
shots fired.
Well, because but he
seems reasonable.
He was going to write one singular column, not a regular one. But apparently they asked him to do too many edits, and he wasn't happy about that. But yeah, like your editor will get you to put in balance if there isn't any there, which is maybe what happened in his case, I'm not sure. And will ask you to like answer questions that aren't answered properly, but they won't try and get you to like change your argument, right? Like.
Could I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Just before we end, I was just wondering, Jemima, you know, we're in a room full of Bitcoiners, and these guys, we are very passionate about Bitcoin, the movement, as well as Bitcoin, the tool. And I know that you've obviously written a lot of pieces about Bitcoin. Have you noticed, because now obviously journalism is now metriced in that we can see average dwell time, you know, click-throughs, where they've come from, all these amazing metrics to see, okay, how well are certain keywords working? Have you noticed that Bitcoin attack article or Bitcoin articles that you write, do they have better metrics than, say, other articles? Because Bitcoiners are so keen to be like, okay, what's been said? You know, how's it been said?
Most Bitcoiners don't have access to like the FT. You know, they don't get behind the paywall, so they just comment on like a headline or what someone says is in the article. But actually, we don't really. I mean, we are not encouraged to like. We have an audience engagement team, and they tell us every week like what are the most viewed articles. But like, I really don't engage very much.
Do the Bitcoin ones do particularly well?
Bitcoin in general? It depends, actually. Like, right now, I would say not really. Like, it depends. If there's a big boom, like, if there's a real big interest in Bitcoin, because it's going up, right? Or because it's, like, very much crashing. But, like, it's been, you know...
You're asking if it's clickbait. Like, is it...
Yeah, you're asking if it's clickbait. Not necessarily, to be honest.
I think it's definitely in the category of clickbaity titles. I mean, back in the day... You know, early on, before even SEO was a thing, I defined, there were like 5 topics that always got people going, and, you know...
It wasn't necessarily the clickbait thing, because obviously anyone can write a clickbait headline, it's more like the dwell time. Like, I know that a lot of your articles inspire articles which then refer back to that article. I know that Bitcoin Magazine, for example,
but people don't have subscriptions. So, like, even if they refer back, like the Bitcoin
I'm
Magazine...
I'm telling you, lots of Bitcoiners read your articles, because I've read the counter articles to them.
And you got recognised in the lobby yesterday, to be fair. Yeah. And they were like, they were a big fan of Jemima. Not so much of me.
Not yet.
No, they were like, no, I like you, Jemima, not you so much.
Some crypto people apparently do. Also, it's lovely to see so many women in your team. Just wanted to say that as well. So many women, because I always get told that I say like, oh, it's so male-dominated, and people are like, that's so unfair. And I just had a little scan, and, you know... It's not very much. It is quite male-dominated, isn't it? Like, I can see some women here, but, like, Jesus, it's very, like, male. Should that change? Should that change?
Is that a problem?
I don't think it's a problem, personally.
I don't think it's a problem because
it's because you like football, I don't like football, and if men want to watch football, that's fine. Like, I don't care or begrudge them. Like, I think my view on all this gender stuff is it's illiberal to force like demographic blocks like of women into anything, because like that's not freedom to me.
I agree.
Women should be allowed, like, if they like it, it's all opt-in, right? But you shouldn't, like, force quotas. It's madness.
Opt out. Buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's the summary. I see we
We're 1 minute.
They've given us more time again. Did you see that?
I did, but we're definitely down to 1 minute now.
We're definitely at the limits.
So we're just going to sum up. Thank you both for coming. It's been a really great discussion. Thank you, guys.
Those two, right?
Yeah. For coming and facing the criticisms and having the conversation. Very, very brave of you, I think, to come up here and face down like the Bitcoin maxis as we've been labeled or laser-eye crazy psychopaths.
That's self-given label.
No, it was Vitalik that gave us that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I know.
The wider crypto world have run with it. But we'll embrace it. But thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, if you would, please give a round of applause for the panel today. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, guys. That was a contentious panel.
Welcome back to the Bitcoin Magazine Analyst Desk, hosted by BitGo. We are live at day 2 of Bitcoin Amsterdam, and I'm joined by Ray Youssef and CK Snarks on the end of the table. Of course, we are still in that heat restriction here in the venue, so that's why CK is bundled up, cozy in there. We just heard a very, very interesting panel from both 2 Bitcoin media people as well as 2 non-Bitcoiners. CK, can we unpack this a little bit?
Yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. Really, it seemed as though, especially Rizzo, Izzy, and Jemima, they came from a very similar place when they started covering Bitcoin. Also, a similar time in the 2013, 2014 kind of era. And they went on 3 really different journeys. Rizzo obviously is the world expert of Satoshi and a Bitcoin historian now. Izzy kind of went to, Bitcoin is only useful if the current system fails, and she even admit that it is kind of failing. And then, we have Jemima, who's like, no, it's a headless Ponzi, and it can't be, even if it is, like, there's some use, like, the fact that it is a headless Ponzi, negates any of that benefit. So it was really interesting to kind of see their 3 different and unique journeys. But I did find it striking that there was really no real criticism other than it's a headless Ponzi. People, and that was kind of leveraged to discredit effectively anything else, right? So I did find it very compelling, Rizzo's pushback on just journalism as it stands today, where frankly journalists aren't experts in the field that they're speaking about. They're supposed to be effectively almost like uneducated, objective researchers who are going to report on it. So I thought that was really interesting.
No, absolutely. I mean, I want to unpack what Izabella was talking about, because she made it seem as though if and when our societies crumble and our current systems end, but there's a caveat to that. The current systems in certain parts of the world. Ray, I know that there are other parts of the world that very much need this. What would you say to Izabella?
I would say to Izabella to zoom out her perspective and see what's happening in other parts of the world. This doomsday scenario has existed in the global south for the past 100 years. These people have been locked in a system of economic apartheid that doesn't even allow them to access any economy, any liquidity outside of their current country, right? In Africa, it's easier to get on a bus with a suitcase full of cash to make a payment to the country next door, let alone sending money outside of the West. Then you get into all these capital controls. What this does, it has trapped so much potential, so much wealth in these places, and these people have been suffering. So when you introduce Bitcoin to them as a means of exchange, their eyes light up and they think, wow, I can actually be a global citizen right now. I don't have to be invisible anymore. And their natural business acumen, ambition, hustle takes over, and you start to see magic happen. Money starts to flow along trade routes you could never imagine, from the Dominican Republic to Rwanda, from Nigeria to China, from everywhere in the global south to everywhere else in the global south, and that is the dream. Izabella might very well be right from the Western perspective, but the world is not just the West. There is an entire world out there of young hustlers that have seen the Bitcoin for what it truly is, the promise of an alternative to actually join the world economy, a promise of actual free trade that has not existed in the past 100 years, and that is tremendous. That is what everyone should be talking about. We shouldn't just be trapped in this little nucleus of the West and bickering back and forth, Ponzi this, Ponzi that. There's an entire world out there where magic is happening, wealth is being unlocked, and people are put to work through the magic of proof of work. It's beautiful. Let's take a look at that, folks. The grass is a lot greener on that side.
No, I just want to say, hey, I think it was very clear that the one journalist that actually spent time in Africa checked his financial privilege, and a lot of the Western-based journalists, they did not, and it was very clear in their comments. Back to you, Q.
No, absolutely. I have to recommend the book by Alex Gladstein, Check Your Financial Privilege. It will really help broaden your scope. We have the privilege, most of us do, of having the financial backing of the Western world. Most of the world does not have that good fortune. We are about to hear an excellent panel now from Jessica and Katie. Be sure to stick around. We will be back after this next panel. Be sure to like and subscribe down below as well.